in on that just a little bit, with your permission. Dr. Philby was a longtime educator and also was the first principal at Robert Frost Elementary, our neighbor here at MTC. So not only do we have the Ivy connection to the school district, but we have actually Dr. Beaton himself as a connection to the school district. So thanks for those opening thoughts. Well, we're here today to talk about something that we've had on the docket for really quite a while, to talk about social emotional learning and student well-being. You'll hear this called a number of different things that we use interchangeably, and they're not all the same, but there's a lot of overlap. You'll hear social emotional learning, you'll hear student well-being, you'll hear mental health. And today, what we're really talking about is, what is that? What do we do as a school district, and what are we looking at for the future in this space? And so that's really the purpose of a deep dive today into what we do. Like everything that we really begin with when it comes to the school district and the board, we start with our strategic plan, our vision for the future of our school district. And in priority statement 1 of our strategic plan, we talk about how we will provide rigorous, effective, and engaging curriculum and instruction for all students to emphasize growth and reduce achievement gap with special focus on the following areas. And that's holding all schools to high expectations for students' social and emotional growth and development. So I'm sure for a good long time, of the district's vision. For sure. Supports.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome today as we walk through that pre-K through 12 supports for social emotional learning. And when we look at that, we really looked at it through the lens of the CASEL 5 SEL competency clusters, and that's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. And we really looked at what do we have in our programs that address all 5 of these competency clusters, and then what district supports do we have with that, and then what community supports are we using within those programs. And so we're going to walk through birth to 3 all the way through 12th grade, and Dr. Noel and I will tag team on that. And so stop us along the way if you have questions or need clarifications on that. So if we start with early childhood, in our early childhood program, we have the high scope curriculum. And that high scope curriculum is embedded in those classrooms in early childhood. It really works on promoting independence, decision making, cooperation through play, just really working on that self-awareness, self-regulation, and helping support those students. And then Sanford Harmony is also embedded in our early childhood classrooms, and that was through T. Danny Sanford. In 2014, he brought that to the Sioux Falls School District. And that Harmony program works with and it's a curriculum for social emotional, and it's activity-based. They do a lesson, they do small group lessons, whole group lessons. They teach tolerance, compassion, and one of the activities they do throughout the year in that with the Sanford Harmony, and it seems like a simple thing, but they pair every week. I get to be with a new partner. So the first week I'm with Carly, and the next week I'm with Kent, and then I'm with Kate. And that way, throughout the year, every student is paired with every other student in the classroom. They're, again, teaching tolerance, acceptance, empathy for others, and it's really a great way to because otherwise you tend to gravitate towards those same kids, and they get to know the strengths of all their classmates within that classroom. So those are some two of the programs in our early childhood. And then the district supports with early childhood. We have a behavior therapist who serves all our early childhood sites, and that person works with the teachers, the students, and the families to create behavior plans, behavior supports. Often they might work on referrals to outside agencies to help support that family, because we know if we can support that whole family, we can support the student for better outcomes. We have 4 family facilitators, and that's with the Head Start program. And so within that early childhood, they really connect. As soon as those students enroll in that program, they connect those families with services. They get to know them. Do they need help with maybe furthering their education? Do they have jobs? Do they have connections out in the community? And really, if you think of those young families, how do we help connect them into services? If I'm a young mom with a first-time student coming to school as a 3-year-old, what services do I need to help support my family? And those family facilitators help do that. And then we have Head Start nurses and EAs, and those nurses and EAs are connected with SDSU and USD, and they help bring services into the classroom. So they do small lessons with those teachers. They do the fluoride treatments for the students in those classrooms, and they're also available at all the evening events. Same with the family facilitators and the behavior therapists. So whenever those families are in the building, they see this group of staff, and they start to connect and they trust. And so that way they know that they can go to them really as a mentor to help to provide supports throughout the community. And then community supports for early childhood. We have the SAMHSA grant for birth to 3. So those are our very youngest little friends that we serve across the community, and that's provided through Southeast Behavioral Health, and again, wraparound services for the family. Those students are identified. They maybe need some extra supports. They connect them with physicians. If there's additional testing that needs to be done, that grant pays for that. And we're just getting started with that this year. And then Avera Family Wellness. And Avera Family Wellness has been with the Sioux Falls School District since 2014, and they believe in supporting that whole family. And they, on an average of 50 families a year, and they continue on, and this is the 3-year-olds all the way through 12th grade, they continue on with those families and continue to support, so they can get them an expedited referral to the doctor, to a psychologist, whatever they need. But again, they know those families, so they can help support them, and they're up to 300 families, and we appreciate all their support with that. And we have a representative here today from Avera, so thanks for being here.
They stay connected with us too, maybe if you'll allow me to just.
Yes.
It's not just we'll put the program in and see how it goes. Robin and her folks meet with us annually, and we do our own organizational checkup with them as well. So it's a great relationship, and certainly part of the solution when we figure out that whole social emotional space.
And then we move on to the elementary programming. And when we look at the programming that we have within the elementary, Collaborative Classroom is our English Language Arts curriculum. And within that English Language Arts curriculum is embedded some of those self-management, engagement opportunities for students to work with each other. So it's turn and talk to a partner. Now I have to listen to my partner and what are they saying. So building some of those communication skills, which also builds the empathy. Second step curriculum is our counseling curriculum. And it's also embedded in our special ed department with social skills. And so teaching that self-regulation and that common language across the building. So we have 23 elementaries using second step curriculum within the counseling program. They do small group, individual, and classroom guidance. And that's the key right there with that common language throughout the building. That's important for students to be able to, what you say to me in the hallway is what my classroom teacher is going to say, or maybe the teacher out on the playground. So you'll hear that through many of these programs, but that common language is very important for students because then they know the expectations. Oveus bullying program, we've had that for 8 years now in the Sioux Falls School District, and every building has a Oveus team in the elementary, and that team looks at current practices, they review behavior data annually, and how do we support those emotional needs of those kids. And often it's looking at, are we coming at it from a positive or a negative perspective when we write our rules for the classroom, rules for the hallway. Again, building student capacity and how they engage with others and those positive interactions. So if I'm coming at you with, I don't like that, how do I respond as a student? And that's that social emotional, helping support them so they don't melt down at that point. And then individual and group counseling, touched on that just a little bit, individual, group, and classroom guidance. And we have a counselor in each building. We have Boys Town training, and Boys Town training is, we have Boys Town in 8 buildings, and that is put in with our Tier 2 programming in those buildings. And again, it's how I respond to students, helping build their social emotional, that self-regulation. How do I respond when I'm upset? And if we can teach students empathy and guidance through that, again, that common language. And then we have a couple programs listed here. Bridges at Horseman is one of our programs to help support our students. Tier 2 programming in 8 buildings. And then these next 4 bullets here talk about individual programs. And we have Move This World pilot in 4 elementary buildings. And Move This World is a social emotional curriculum. And it's different than most curriculums because it's delivered electronically. And so every morning, those classrooms turn on a video clip, and that video clip walks them through identifying their emotions. And students go through activities. They might do some deep breathing, they might do some stretching, but then they have to turn and talk to a partner, and they have to tell them about their morning or something that happened last night. And again, working through some of those emotions and how they respond to that. And then the other piece is they close the day with an activity online also. And so throughout that whole week, they're working with the same emotion to reflect and refine on that, and it's done through emojis. So if you walk in those buildings, the principal in their office has a poster with the emojis on it and the emotions that they can identify. The counselor has that. If they have a Tier 2 room, it's in that room, it's in the classroom, and it's really helping those students to be able to express how they're feeling, because often that's what they're struggling with. They know they don't feel quite right, but what is that? And now they have an emotion to put with that. And we're seeing some interesting results with that. So it's fun to see. That's a newer program. And then we have a state grant in 4 elementaries, and that grant was available to buildings that were identified as priority and focus. So those are federal funds, and it's a 3-year grant. And the curriculum that those buildings have implemented is Caring Schools Community, which is part of the collaborative classroom curriculum. And so it's a nice connection. If you think about collaborative classroom, we have that in every classroom. That's our English language arts curriculum. Now they're using Caring Schools Community, which also blends that learning together. It's a nice connection between that. And then the buildings that have SIPs, all three of those, same curriculum, but they blend together to make it seamless for the students. And then second step is in one of the elementaries, and they chose to use that. That's at EIC. And they chose to use that because it's our second step curriculum from our counseling and our special ed, because when those students transfer out into the buildings, then it's seamless for them. So that what they've heard in their classrooms at EIC, they also will hear in the classrooms from the guidance counselor. And then we have mindful classrooms, and we have 2 buildings using that right now, and that's for the adults. And the adults in the building have elected to do this online curriculum to help themselves. How do I help myself take care of myself so I can take care of my kids? And again, they elected to do that. It's an online curriculum, but it helps them to be able to recognize how they're feeling so they can help their students. And then we have one building that's fully implemented Leader in Me, and we have others that have done book studies on Leader in Me. And Leader in Me uses the 7 habits to really help students identify goals, set goals, and take care of ourselves as a community. How do we support that as a district? So this is what it looks like in the elementary world. We have 22.95 counselors, success coordinators in our 8 buildings with Tier 2. We have 8 social workers that work across 23 elementary buildings to help students and families support with attendance, whatever those families need that are identified by the buildings. We have 3 behavior teams, and that's K-12, that those behavior teams work within the buildings to support students. We have 8 EL liaisons. We have 1.5 Indian education liaison. We have 23 student assistance teams. So in each building there's a student assistance team. So if we're struggling, we can come together to look at the resources. How do we support this student? Have we tried this? What's the data telling us? What outside agencies can we help to support them? And then we can reconvene to make sure that that student's making progress. We have Tier 2 programs in 7 buildings to help support students, create behavior plans, regulate their emotions. And then we have 1 district crisis team that responds across the district as needed.
A quick question.
Yes.
So when you look at like your behavior team or your student assistance team, it says 23. So there are 23 people or there are 23 teams?
Yep, 23. So the behavior teams, there's 3 teams across the district that, so if I want the behavior team to come support me at a building, you write up what you've done, you request them, and then they'll come out and support the student that you're requesting assistance with. A student assistance team, each building has a team.
Okay.
So there's.
And then are the teams, so like if I'm in X school and I have a student assistance team, that team could include a social worker?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So what's the makeup of
Right.
who's on a student assistance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Each building identifies who they want on that team. Very frequently, it could be a social worker, for sure your counselor, probably your special education, and then classroom teachers. So you'd have primary, in elementary, you'd have primary, intermediate teachers on that, administrations on that. So that way you can look at across the board, okay, we're struggling here, we've tried this, and then you have different experts around the table to say, have you tried that? Often they'll include the parents in on that meeting, because then we're in it together. It's a team approach. You know, we need the school, the parents, and the community, everybody together.
Thank you.
Yep. And then the community supports, we have Southeast Behavioral Health in 15 of our elementary schools. And so the counselors and the social workers work together, and any student that they refer out to Southeast Behavioral Health, then often that counselor will come into the school to help provide services for that student, or the families can go to the facility. It's whatever works best for the family. And LSS Path, funded by the United Way, works similar to that, where we write the referrals and get the families and connected with Avera in that case. And LSS mentoring program, these last three are identified by CASEL as supports for social emotional. So mentoring, Big Brothers and Sisters, and Girls on the Run. We have over 1,100 mentors district-wide coming into our building to support students. Big Brothers, Big Sisters, great program, and that's more of an outreach out into the community. And we have Girls on the Run in 12 elementary buildings.
Did you include Let Me Run on that too?
Oh, good point, Kate. Yes.
I was wondering that too, is that at the elementary? Or
It's elementary, yeah.
Mhm.
So it's Girls on the Run or boys.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay. Are you-
Starting with the middle school portion of this, there's a few of the different programs that we have currently throughout the middle schools, the 5 middle schools. The Project Aware program is at Whittier Middle School right now. It's a state grant that we had applied for. There was 4 schools selected across South Dakota, and Sioux Falls was one of those. We had located that at Whittier, and there's an individual there that is employed through Southeast Behavioral Health and then one through the district. The grant pays for the district employee. And it's really to provide those wraparound services to be able to help connect those students and families that are in need with some of the support services that are there for the social emotional aspect, especially that emotional piece of it. And they do things where it will be working at the homes and with the families and with the individual students in the school. They've really had quite a few they've come into contact now with students at the school, and they're beginning that process more and more now, going into the homes and working with the families as well. So that's a pilot program. It's a 5-year pilot program that we're involved in, and we'll carry out through that amount of time. The Obeas Bully Prevention Program is located at each one of our middle schools and is done through the Pro Time at the middle schools. And each one of those schools has that Pro Time segment, and they go through the Obeas program, which is a recognized program that we utilize for many years now throughout all of our middle schools. The Boys Town training, Dr. Boyson had hit on that some. Currently, one of our middle schools utilizes that extensively, and others use portions of that through the Boys Town training process. Children's Connection is found at 2 of our middle schools right now that utilize that, and that's for students that have incarcerated parents, and really part of that family connection through Sioux Falls Psychological, and it's based also at the school there through the counselors that utilize those services. And so it's really for those families that are those children that have an incarcerated parent, and the process, the strains that can bring, the emotion that can bring in that, and some of the challenges. So they work through that in some of the groups there at the school, and it's located at the school. Our Tier 2 programming and Odyssey program are the emotional, the behavioral programs that help those students. The Tier 2 is located at the middle school itself and is at each one of our middle schools. And so that program, there's a teacher and an aide in each one of those rooms, and they work with a smaller class size, work to establish a lot of practices and protocols for those students so that they can be successful in the traditional classroom with the emotions, with the behavior. The Odyssey program obviously is a pull-out program that we have located at Axtell Park, and that is a middle school only program there. Individual and group counseling sessions happen at each one of our middle schools as they work with the students. They form different types of groups, so it's hard to identify that as one specific group. Depends on what the needs are and depends on the time of the year. In talking with some of the counselors, they said it really depends as they go throughout the year what some of the needs are. They identify some of those things, and if it seems like there's a small core number that have some of the same concerns or issues, then they'll make a group with it. Some of those groups also are just helping students to incorporate into the school if they're new into the school, or if they've had a loss of a parent, things like that go into those individual and group counseling sessions. And then the health curriculum. There's a component throughout the health curriculum, as I talk to the middle school administrators, that does go through and addresses the well-being of students, the emotional well-being, the social well-being of the students, that is a dedicated piece of the health curriculum as they go through the middle school program. Most of our high school students can qualify with completing the health requirement as a middle school, so majority of our students do take the health component in the middle school segment. As far as our district staff that support this through our middle schools, and you will see, and there's a summary page towards the end that'll kind of show you an overall picture of the entire district. The counselors, there's 14 that are just in the middle schools themselves. The success coordinators, there's 2 that work in the middle schools, George McGovern and Whittier. The social workers, there's 5. Social workers are one that some of those numbers, they'll work in the middle school, but they're also assigned in elementary, or a couple elementaries that they work with. Some of the ones you'll see coming up with the high school, they'll also cover some elementary at times, other than the one over at Roosevelt, just due to sheer numbers there. So I'll show you an overall slide at the end here that gives you the numbers of our support staff district-wide. But so many of them are supporting the programs that we have and working with those students in multiple different ways. Our behavior teams, 3 of which that go throughout the district working with the middle schools. Our ELL liaisons, that number, the 8, is a district-wide number that work throughout all the district and really going to the homes and helping those families of the ELL students to get them associated and attached with the school. They have so many of the parents that they bring into the building for the classes that they have for our ELL families to help to bring them up to speed on some of the processes that we utilize in the American school system. The Indian education liaisons predominantly work here out of IPC because it's district-wide, and they will go out and reach out to many of our Native American families and working with them to complete documentation, paperwork, but also helping with that association into the school and activities that happen at the school to help them to become more part of the school. Our student assistance team, each building does, and just to expand upon it, it is, as you go through there is good representation from special education, from our social workers, from administration, at each one of those levels as you go throughout the middle school, the high school, elementary as well. And that team really comes together to look at that individual student to see what is the best thing we can do for that child when they're referred to the student assistance team, and teachers can refer, administrators can refer, parents can make a referral to the student assistance team at the building, and then they utilize their resources to help that child be successful. Our Tier 2 program, there's 12 of which that are at our middle schools, so some of which have 2 different programs. Our 12 staff, some of which will have 2 programs, Tier 2 programs located at their building, and then the district crisis team. Our community supports, Southeast Behavioral Health is at all 5 of the middle schools, plus at Axtell Park. And LSS Path, which is funded through the Sioux Empire United Way, is at Memorial Middle School. And so both Southeast Behavioral Health and LSS Path locate and work out of Memorial. And a lot of that's because of some of those elementaries that come up through, and they're starting to have those kids, and we don't want those kids to change counselors that they've been working with, so they stay with those same ones going through. The same would be true when they hit at Roosevelt. Now that'll start to expand some as we have some of the other elementaries and they come up through to the middle school as well, as we pick up more and put more schools with LSS Path. Children's Connection, as I'd stated, there's someone at the Family Connection that helps and supports the schools with that, so they do that in cooperation with our school counselors. And then the LSS mentoring program and Big Brothers, Big Sisters. The high school programming. Our high school, a lot of the programming goes through the options that the students have at that level. So they really begin to start to focus in on what are some of the things that they wish to do and some of those supports and choices that go along with that. Our high school learning centers provide some alternative scheduling, alternative coursework, a lot of the online or supports that would go through that, especially if they're starting to have difficulties or struggles that could be impacting them as far as school attendance. And that's how we help to intervene to be able to provide some alternative education and keep them still at the school setting. If you take that, and I know that comes up a little bit later on there, but even at our alternative high school over at Axtell Park with the Joe Foss program there on Budsman, they can go there and get a similar format of that alternative and more flexible style of scheduling. But we truly try to do that within the learning centers at the high schools as well, so they can do that and still take part of a traditional load, but catch back up on some of those things that they've had difficulties in. Individual counseling sessions and the group counseling sessions, they're significant throughout our high schools. And again, in discussion with our high school counselors, so many of those, some carry over from year to year. Some of those are also ones that begin as they start to see a specific need, especially when they're doing the individual counseling. So they'll have different pairs of counselors work to do those group counseling sessions. Sometimes they'll also bring in individuals from the outside to help with some of those group counseling sessions, especially when they have the parents sign off on those. The academic flexibility and programming, I know that sounds unique as a thing that would help with the social emotional, but when I talk to the counselors, that's a big part of it, that they can have such flexibility with them as far as going out to our CTE program, just that change of pace and the hands-on approach to it, and kind of break up that day with many of those students between the traditional school setting, the alternative learning center setting, or the CTE setting. Same way when they go out and have their internships and their work for credit. And so they felt that was really a big part of it, where the students start to have some of that choice in there, and really that helps them with that emotional well-being. Our career counseling, we do have our career counselors that are part of schools, and we'll see that there's 4 of those, one associated to each of the traditional schools and one that works with New Tech High and CTE. And so they're really helping to set up those internships, and as the students go out and can complete credit hours in that, and the job shadows. So if the individual can't do a complete internship, then they could do a job shadow where they go out and see a business or a career. And then our Tier 2 programming in our alternative high school. The Flex program for Axtell Park is very similar to what Odyssey would be in the middle school setting. Our staff that support that, our counselors, our traditional counselors at the high school, there's 19.85 FTE. Our success coordinators, 3. The career counselors, so there's one at CT, there's a career counselor, and then right below that, the state-funded career launch counselors, that's the ones that we had through that state program, those 4. That's one that I referenced. There's one at each one of the high school that's affiliated and helps with the internship and the job shadows, and then one between New Tech High and CTE. We have 5 social workers that work out of the high schools, including the Axtell Park programs and New Tech High and the 3 traditional schools. The behavior teams, they're district-wide, and so they go and help at each one of the buildings and support the buildings when there's unique behavioral things. Most part of that will be done with the behavior team in the elementary. There's a greater reliance in the high school on the student assistance team, but they're still available to the high schools as well. ELL liaisons, there's 3 that specifically work out of the 3 traditional high schools, 1 assigned to each, and they obviously work with the families and the students. They're a big support for us getting the families in for parent-teacher conferences, for some of those different information nights, and helping the families stay connected. Our Indian education liaison, and then the student assistance teams. There's 1 located at each of the 4 high schools. Our Tier 2 staff, there's 1 Tier 2 program at each building of the 3 traditional high schools, and then the district crisis team. Our high school community sports, again, goes back into Southeast Behavioral Health, and they're at 4 of the high schools, including the New Tech High. They're also at Axtell Park. They have a handful of counselors that work out there. And then LSS Path is at one of our high schools. That's over at Roosevelt, where I had said earlier that they're going to stay with those kids that are coming up through those elementary schools and into the middle school and then high school. So they wish not to change the counselors. And then our LSS mentoring program. When you look at an overall look at our staffing across the district, our school counselors, as we go through the traditional school counselors that you would think as a counselor, there's 71.3. And I've had those broken down for you at each of the schools now that you can see. I just summarized the elementary all into one lump sum with a 22.95. But the breakdown between each of the schools going there, the success coordinators, there's 3 at the high school, 1.5 at the middle school. One of them's full-time at one school and then half-time at another school. And then 8 covered at the elementary sites. And then our career counselors, there's 1 in the state-funded, there's 4. So that's just a composite look at our resources, overall staffing. And then that, continuing with the staffing part for our district resources, our liaisons district-wide, there's 12. Social workers, 9.85. Our homeschool liaisons, 1.5 that work specifically with our Native American students. And then the student assistance teams, there's 32, so you'll find that at each one of our buildings as you go throughout the district. The behavior teams, the 3. and then the programs that we have, the Bridges and Odyssey and Flex, and the other alternative programming that we have at Axtell Park. One thing that I really wanted to look at is those community sports, and I'm going to take one of those. I know Robin Prunty is here with us today from Avera, but and we have a great resource there working through those elementaries and all the way up as they follow those students. As you go through Southeast Behavioral Health counselors, there's 30 in the LSS path counselors. Those two programs, there's 33 counselors that come in and work specifically with the students at the schools and then go into the homes and work with the families at the home. And I'm just going to highlight the one here with Southeast Behavioral Health. That's a partnership that we started up much more extensively 3 years ago. And there's 30 master level counselors at this time that they have employed, and they've met with or served 1,529 students so far through the first 3 quarters of the school year. That's 1,529 individual unique students. So many of those they've met with multiple times. Their goal is obviously to work in the home, in the family. So many of those times are not even necessarily coming to the school. It's referred to by the school, signed off by the parents. And then they really are trying to work to get into the homes and help in the home site. And a lot of that deals with that social, emotional aspect and trying to work at the core of that in the home to help the student be successful at school. They've also been in partnership with Washington High School, had done that as a pilot piece of that with the attendance part of it, and trying to work on some of those truant students on what may be impacting them and being able to go into the home and provide that counseling service in the home to help that child to be able to attend school more often. They completed 320 risk assessments and then 130 CD screenings. So that's just one of our many partners that we have that have gone in and worked with groups of students. And the numbers that they work with are a staggering number that we don't pay for so many of those as far as the district. It's a community support that we have that we rely on quite heavily to be able to help our students within the schools.
What's a CD screening?
Yes. Chemical dependency. Yep. Because we know, obviously, without even stating, but obviously if there's that chemical dependency issue there, it's going to impede their academics. And so they go in there for those screenings, and then they'll make the recommendation to the family what that follow-up help and support should be.
And so with that referral, is that at no cost to the family once that happens, or?
That is correct. It is no cost to the family. Yep. All these things that we go through, you know, with our community supports and the Avera programs, the LSS PATH, the Southeast Behavioral Health, those are all agreements that we have and supports that we have that truly come through as no cost that way. There's some things that could be charged out eventually depending on income level of the family, but most all of which are of absolutely no cost. When we look at these things here with Southeast Behavioral Health, all those 1529 and the risk assessments and the CD screenings, those are at no cost whatsoever to a family. They're a community support. Now, part of that is through the change of the juvenile justice and those dollars that were saved through by the state and now reallocated back out to communities to help support keeping children in the communities. So many of them come through that. Staff professional development.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about the professional development opportunities that we have for our staff here in the Sioux Falls School District. Our summer symposium is May 30th and 31st at Washington High School, and we're very fortunate to have contracted with Heather Forbes. She will be our keynote on Thursday, and then she has sessions throughout the day on Thursday and Friday. But Heather Forbes is from Beyond Consequences, and a number of our elementary buildings have really worked with a deep dive on helping support their students and their teachers through ACEs and all the self-regulation that goes into that. And so Heather Forbes will be there to speak with staff and anybody. It's open to anyone if they register. They can come attend her keynote and any of her breakout sessions, but really looking at how do we help support that self-regulation and self-awareness for students. And then another session through the summer symposium is ACEs, and that's that trauma-informed classroom. ACEs is adverse childhood experiences, and so they say depending on how many ACEs you have, that's how many trauma events you've had in your life, and how do you deal with that? And if a child has 1 or 2, they can usually work through that, but if they have more, the harder it gets for those. And really looking at that brain development that goes with those ACEs. So if I come from a divorced family, or if I lost a parent, different things like that, or job loss for my family, that helps us to understand what our students are walking into the building with and how do we support them. 2 other sessions is Top 20 training, and Top 20 training works on increasing student engagement in the classroom and looking at, we did the Top 20 training with our EAs last year for our EA in-service, and now bringing it to all staff through the summer symposium. And then we have those kids, and those kids really looks at supporting staff through self-regulation strategies that they can use for themselves, but also with their students. And then that common language for cool-down strategies. So that's a summer symposium. We have an SEL strand through there. Great opportunity for our staff and to be able to provide this for them. And then throughout the district, K-12, you know, they've done different book talks that focus on that. Help for Billy is a big one, and that's one of Heather Forbes' books. And they have taken a deep dive into Help for Billy and looking at, again, what do these children walk into our classrooms with? How do we help support them? And how do I take care of myself as a learner, as a teacher? Fostering Resilient Learners is another popular book. All Learning is SEL. And that's exactly what we need to do, is throughout our day in our classroom, how do we embed those social emotional learning opportunities? How do we teach self-regulation, empathy for others, and really looking at that across the curriculum. Relationships, Responsibility, and Regulation is another book talk. Leader in Me, and Mindful Classrooms. So those are popular titles across the district. In service, throughout, we've had poverty walks, we've had SEL training. The high school, the last in-service day on Thursday the 18th, I believe it was, in April, they had a large SEL strand over at Lincoln for all high school teachers. And then we've had ACES training also. We've had speakers, staff trainings, multiple conferences that they attend. And then EA in-service this year on August 8th, we have an SEL strand that's going through there to bring that information to the, our educational assistants on that day.
So now to kind of draw this to the end here, creating a structure, what does this look like going forward? How do we put the pieces in place? Because you can see there's a lot of stuff there. And it's a little bit grab bag. You know, we do a lot of different things, but how do we put a structure in place to put all that together? Part of that is a power in the American Association of School Administrators, AASA cohort that we are a part of. I think we're one of several schools nationally that are really trying to figure out how do we put a structure in place for the whole social emotional learning and student well-being concept. So I think we'll be in the forefront in that as we continue conversations in that area. We'll try to figure out how do we bring curriculum services alongside student services. So not only do we have the supports in place, but we also have the ability to implement and deliver on those supports by bringing those two folks together. And then with curriculum and student services working side by side, how do we align those systems of support for our students and for our adults in our school district? To kind of wrap it up, our big goal, I would say, if I could find one quote to kind of put a bow on what our big goal is, and this is a quote we learned recently from Margaret Wheatley, and it's to take care of yourself, because that's of critical importance if we're going to help take care of others. To take care of yourself, and then to take care of others. So I think when you put those two together, it's really important that we take care of our adults so that our adults can help take care of our students. Take care of yourself, take care of others, take care of this place. So if we can get all of the people, the adults and the students, taking care of one another, we'll really take care of this organization, as well as putting a big dent in taking care of our community. So that's our goal. It's our big hairy goal, if you will, when it comes to social emotional learning. Questions?
Going along with curriculum, I believe, was it this fall we're going to start studying health curriculum? Is that correct?
This fall or next fall?
Okay, so that's coming up. So that will be part of when we start looking at what changes and what we need to in our curriculum as a district. And besides the, Teresa pointed out so 2 elementaries that are doing some online adult training.
Four.
Oh, 4.
Mhm.
Sorry. Okay, the adult online training. What other, for our middle school and high school, what are we doing besides our in-service, which I think all are great? Are there any other ongoing things for?
Not that I'm aware of at the middle school for the adult learning right now. Not to say that we don't have the mindful classrooms, that we don't have others out there enrolled in that we don't know of. But we know 2 elementaries that they just started it, people shared, and it just kind of steamrolled, and they took that on themselves. So yes, we really have to look at comprehensively, how do we K-12?
I think that's such a good question too, Cynthia, because so many times we look at programs and we put those programs at the elementary level. And we have a lot of folks that work in our middle schools. We have a lot of folks that work in our high schools. And so this isn't just an elementary school issue. It's bigger than that. So your points, bigger kids, bigger problems is exactly right.
Are there more students in the elementary that there's more there?
If you'll just let us ask some questions, we'll open it up for public input, and then I will invite you to ask whatever questions you have, if that's all right. Thank you.
I was going to say, as a nurse, we talk a lot at work about compassion fatigue. And I think that that is a very, very true thing for teachers as well. And you give and you give of yourself all day long, whether it's to your patients that you're taking care of or whether it's to the kids that you're loving on, to try to make them, fill their cups before they go home, or maybe it's a coworker that you're helping. And so we have a lot of things like mindfulness and integrative therapies. And, some people really buy into it and some people don't. But I think offering it is what we have to do, because then people can choose. We can make things available. And so I know there's churches that offer workshops, and even if it's not sponsored by the district, even just to advertise it and to promote self-care, and maybe you'll find that there are enough people who are attending that it makes sense to offer something at IPC or at a gymnasium of one of the buildings or whatever it is. But I think starting small and at least providing it, and maybe you're doing that. I don't get those emails, so I don't mean to say we're not, but thinking about those kinds of things I think is so important from a compassion fatigue when we're taking care of people, that, like you said, if we can take care of ourselves, we have so much more to give to other people.
One of the phrases that we have in the district is personal development is professional development. So we really want everybody to take care of themselves so that they can take care of others.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I was just a couple comments I was curious about when we talk about middle school, and I don't know a lot about the Olveus program. I know that it's there, and I know that it's in pro time. And so I'm curious, are there modules on things like social media and digital citizenship, and how do we treat people not sitting next to them, but like online, and how do we include or not include people? Because I think that there's some of those underlying things that happen, maybe more so in like a middle school or a high school where kids have more access to electronics and social media, and how are we addressing that when a teacher can't see that? I mean, you don't know what Snapchat was just sent because you're clearly not on the thread, but you know that there are things going on, and how are we as counselors, as teachers, talking about that, intervening?
Great question on it. Because being even as a building principal, high school building principal, so much of it is through the social media aspect, and that's growing immensely over the last few years, let alone the last 5 years. A big part of the Olveus is a common language that they utilize, and a common identification of what bullying is, and trying to empower those individuals that see it to bring it forward and comment on it and pass that information in. So it may not be that you are personally being bullied, but if you see that, how do you help to intervene and to report that to someone and make that known, as well as the individual that is maybe being bullied and how they report that. Now, they do that through a variety of ways. If they specifically break that down into social media context, it is discussed whether there's a component or module that specifically talks about that. I do not know.
Okay.
I do know when I was part of the training that went through with it, the big piece of the discussion was, what do you do? How do you identify it? What are those things you look for that are bullying, and who do you report it to? And if you're somebody that sees it, you're still obligated as a person, as a friend, as another human being to report that information. So it's a lot of language and processes. They go through some scenarios, but to specifically say it's social media aspect, I would have to ask on that.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on that
Yeah.
before you keep going?
Yeah.
I've got an 8th grader at Patrick Henry, and I know that, I think it was last year, they offered, a session for parents and middle schoolers to come and talk about social media. And, it would be great if they offered those more frequently. I think it was on a night we couldn't go. I'm like, I really want to go to this session, but, those are the types of things I think we can keep doing in our schools to help bring that awareness of social media, and not just on the bullying side of it, but just every aspect of it. Digital citizenship, that kind of thing. Just an idea to put out there.
Great point. And I know one high school and one middle school had those sessions available during parent-teacher conferences. And that's a lot of times where they do that, is the parent-teacher conferences will have them in, and they'll have a session possibly about that in the high school FAFSA. And so they have a variety of different things that way, but great point
They're
that way.
great.
Yeah.
I wish we could do them more often, or record them and put them on K-Learn or something like that.
Give people access
Right.
whose schedules don't, and my only other question was, we do have lots of great resources and we have lots of great staff. I think about the instruction that we give, and it's very structured. We say we have a lesson plan, we have a curriculum. I wonder about the downtime. I wonder about the in-between classes and the before and the after school, and how can we help kids to be kind? And how can we help kids to not just utilize the skills that they're learning while they're sitting in that 15, 20-minute pro time, but that they carry that and they apply it? And I don't know that any of us sitting here has the answer, but I think that's what's probably most bothersome for me, is we have all these great people working on great things, but we all still hear those stories about people who don't feel comfortable or have things yelled at them in the class, in the hallway. And then I think to myself, man, our schools are full. We have teachers who are trying to pack their classroom up to move it to on a cart to get to the next class. They can't be standing in the hallways every single passing period. You know what I mean? Like, there's challenges that we can work around, but I think that's my struggle, is how do we get all these great things that we're teaching into like the actual action? And I think that takes teachers like they are, and I think it takes us as parents talking about that to our kids at home outside of the classroom and correcting those behaviors. And so I just as an awareness, it's not an answer I need. I just feel like, yeah, you're welcome. I just feel like that's something that it's a great takeaway for all parents to go home and say, what did you learn in your class that you talked about in pro time? And maybe observe for scenarios and really try to be that example, because we see terrible examples of people online all the time, and we don't want to be that for our kids. And so I think it's up to each of us as individuals to try to be that advocate and show empathy and understanding and make good, positive choices for people too. So sorry to ramble, but I feel like it's very important, and I don't know it's something we can attack just as a school district, but we certainly have a piece of that.
I think Carla, you bring up a really good point, and it is a little bit of, well, what's the outcome?
Mm-hmm.
I know what the outcome is in math.
Yeah.
I give an ACT test, or I give a Smarter Balance test, or I give whatever assessment it is. This one's a lot more difficult to put an assessment together to say,
how do we do?
We've got that outcome. And the reason, I think, is there isn't an ending spot for being kind or treating each other well or taking care of ourselves. It's definitely a journey, and I think that's what makes it most difficult.
Okay. Ma'am, if you would like to address your questions.
Yeah, I was just
Here, let me give you this. Yeah.
I was just curious, are there more kids in the elementary school? Because I noticed there were more counselors in the elementary school versus the high school and the middle school. So I was just kind of wondering what that was about.
So if you think of our grade configurations, our elementary schools are kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grades. So we've got 6 classes there. At our middle schools, we have 3 classes. In our high schools, we have, or grade levels, and in our high school, we have 4 grade levels. So we do have more elementary students than we have middle school students. We do have more elementary school students than we have high school students. Anything else? Okay. Okay. And for anybody watching, anybody in the audience, we're certainly available for questions here as well.
All right, thank you for that report. We don't have our Southeast Tech meeting, which typically follows our work session. That will be held on May 13th at 4 o'clock, I believe, prior to our regular board meeting on the 13th. They're still working on budget issues and getting the budget put together and having that go through the Southeast Tech Council next week, and then that board meeting will happen. So in place of that, we had talked about at an earlier meeting, since 4 of our board members went to the National School Board Association convention, and there's a fairly sizable investment in that, and asked that we could get a report from each of you on a session that you went to that was particularly interesting to you, that you think information could be brought back, and that our school district and students and teachers could benefit from. So Carly, if you want to start that off, that'd
Sure.
be great.
I went to several sessions, and there were a lot of really, really good topics this year. One of them kind of ties into what we just got done talking about, and it was more geared towards mental health, but similar to the social emotional. And is that the one you attended with me, Cynthia? Yes. Okay. So it was given by the superintendent of a Wisconsin school district, and the things that I found really interesting were that they created this mental health committee of educators and community agency personnel, and this group met on a monthly basis, and they did several different things. They developed district policy and administrative guidelines around mental health of students, and I think that that's really something that we don't specifically have here in Sioux Falls regarding like an actual policy or guidelines. And so I printed off just one of them that I thought was interesting that talks about student mental health, and this one is not necessarily a policy, but it's an administrative guideline, and I'm happy to share links with anybody that wants them. And so it talks a little bit about what you do upon learning that a student has been admitted to a mental health treatment facility, some of the steps that you might take. It talks about partnerships with mental health treatment providers in the community, and then it gives kind of a listing of what types of training, interventions, direct instruction, wraparound supports to staff, students, and families will be offered by the district. So I think it's kind of nice to have some of that in writing to reference. And so I thought we could entertain that idea and see how that might apply to our district. So there's, I think, 3 of them online that they have, that they talked about. They also have, and I have a couple of handouts I grabbed extra, they have a kind of a 3-wheel approach that they had in their handouts, and they had a classroom approach, a building or a school approach, and then an organizational level approach, and some of the different interventions and things that they looked at from those suggestions of things to do. And one of the things that stuck out to me that I'd never heard of is that there's actually teachers or adults can be certified in youth mental health first aid. And it's an 8-hour class that they can take. And it is in no way encouraging people to diagnose students with anything, but it's more of a way to help them learn how to support students who have mental health issues. I thought it was very interesting that 20% of children or adolescents have a mental health disorder, and for about 5 of those, the disorder is very severe. And so they have several of their staff members, teachers, principals, administrators who are youth mental health first aid certified, and it currently is kind of being trialed to see for students 16 and older, so you could actually have peer-to-peer kind of counseling that would take place too for those students that are over 16. They also have a very nice pamphlet that has some good good information about what their group does that they share. And so just some different support services, some different statistics. Over half of all mental health disorders begin by age 14 and 75% by age 24. And those are the students that we're working with day in and day out. And sometimes it's the adults that we're working with too. And so I think it's just important to have that awareness. The gentleman that spoke, he's the superintendent, but he also has, I believe, what else was he? He had some other credentials that he had done a lot of work and talked about how really this isn't a topic that's being it's being talked about a lot, but a lot of action isn't being taken by school districts. Kind of like social emotional learning, it's new and people don't know what steps to take. And so I just thought this was a really nice kind of layout of just some first steps to take. So I will share pamphlets on that one. Another one that I went to, this wasn't a session that I went to, but there were some very young looking people at this conference. And so I was talking to these students, and they are actually student board members. And so Cynthia and I picked their brains a little bit about what they did and learned a lot about their structure of their school. They're from New York. And they had one representative from each of their high schools. They were elected and they served from the middle of their junior year to the middle of their senior year. And for them, their kind of capstone was attending this conference at the end to kind of bring everything together. And the pride that these students had and the involvement and the investment that they had in their districts and their classes was amazing. They were elected by their peers, so they had to run kind of a campaign. They met monthly with the superintendent. They met and they went to their student council meetings and brought back all the kind of meeting minutes of what might be important to students. They were able to bring feedback back to the board. And I know you do a great job with our superintendent's council. I think you have a great, and so I'm just thinking, how can we even get some other kids involved in different ways and give them leadership opportunities? Yeah, they're non-voting. They took turns. There were 4 of them, right? Yes. And they took turns sitting at the board table with the board. So when it was their school's meeting to report on, they sat with the board, and then the other 3 sat in the front row, so they could give feedback if asked, but they weren't part of the meeting. And then that student whose turn it was would give a report from their school and say, here's what's going on in my high school. And then the next month they would rotate, so everyone kind of had a chance. I don't know, it was very interesting and something I think I would love to just have more information or more conversation about. I think it's a great leadership opportunity for our students, and maybe it's something we think about as we bring a new high school on as a transitional, I don't know, but those were 2 things. Are you going to talk about undercover student?
You can start.
Okay. The last one was we went to.
I didn't have much time to prepare.
Oh. So we went to an event that was called Undercover Student, and you may see something in October. Was it Netflix? I can't remember where it was going to be on, but this guy who literally looked like a junior or a senior in high school went undercover across the country to, I don't even know how many, I didn't write down, but numerous high schools. Sometimes he only stayed for a week. Sometimes he stayed for a full semester, and they had no idea that he was 24. And he documented, he got to know people, and he kind of did an experiment. And of course, he had lots of liabilities and lots of waivers and stuff. But he was very, very inspiring. And he talked a lot about how it only takes 10 seconds to be a mentor. And it's 10 seconds of uninterrupted listening to somebody makes you a mentor, because sometimes kids don't get that. And he made a point to say when people came and talked to him, he didn't have his phone out. If someone said, hey, can you meet me at 3:30 in the library to do homework, he was there at 3:28. You know, like he was a committed friend, and he talked about the different people that he met and the things that people opened up to him about that he had only known them for like a week, and they were confessing all these things to him because they were present and they had his undivided attention and they felt like they were meaningful to him. And so his whole conversation was about connecting with people. And so this is going to be a show. I can't remember if it's what station it's going to be on, but this fall in October. And so I'll let you guys know when it comes out, because I'll be very interested to watch it. But there were some of these student representatives then who got up, and he had a microphone and they could ask questions. And there was one of them that was very much like, I would be really mad if you were in my school and I would feel betrayed that you false, you know, and he said, I didn't lie about who I was. I didn't make up, like, it was me. I was just said I was 18. You know, he said, I told him about my brothers and sisters, and I mean, all the stuff that he shared, and he's like, I didn't falsify anything. And he said he didn't have a single person who was, like, they were mad that he left because he was such a good friend, but they weren't mad at him for what he had done. And then there was a guy that got up and he said, and he had done 4 kind of profiles of students that he had met during his time. And this guy stood up and he said, I'm gonna make up names because I don't remember what they're, but he's like, your Lori is my Stephanie. And it was all these, I mean, he had these scenarios
This was
of.
another student board member, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he had given, you know, this person, he had known for like a week, and he had been in this theater class with her, and she had confessed to him that she was cutting, and nobody else knew this. Nobody knew this, and then so this student stood up, and he's like, the person you're talking, the example you gave right there of this person who everyone thought was amazing, that's my girlfriend, and she does that same thing. He's like, these people are walking in all of your schools. And it was just, I will tell you, I came back and I dropped my daughter off at Edison, and I was looking at students as they were walking across the street, and I was thinking to myself, which one of them are you? You know, like, it just made me really think about students in a totally different way, because we all have kind of our outward who we are, but who are we really, and who do we freely feel like we can share that information with?
At home or.
Yeah, and so it was just it was moving. And so he offers a social emotional learning. That's his big, he's a nonprofit that he started as a freshman in high school as like a project that a counselor encouraged him to do. And it turned into this huge thing where he employs teenagers and 20-somethings who go out and do all this amazing work. And he has a social emotional learning package. And of course, there's a promotion. And so for one day only, so Kate bought it. So we'll see what it looks like.
We took advantage of the deep discount.
Yes, but it's access to tons of videos that are made by students, and they're
YouTube
5 minutes
videos.
long, and it's a whole bunch of stuff,
It's
so.
not just for students, but he's got a whole like teacher curriculum too, so, not a curriculum, but, you know,
Right,
videos.
pieces here and there, so
Yeah.
anyways, that was like, I think Kate and I just sat there and we were like, oh my
I
God,
didn't
like,
take any notes, cause I was just like.
Yeah, enthralled with what he-
It's no wonder he's like 28 years old and, you know, speaks as well as he does.
yeah, and he does do a
Very
lot of
engaging.
speaking engagements. He's from Canada, right?
But he lives in New York now.
Yeah, so we were actually thinking maybe we should look at him for like a opening session or like something that might be a motivational, we're just dreaming big, don't mind us, so.
I think I mentioned it to you once, I just haven't sent you the link yet.
So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for letting me go. It was a really, really great experience, and I learned a ton.
You didn't have,
I've got some high-level stuff I can talk about.
okay.
So knowing what we've been talking about this year and some of our challenges this year, I really focused a lot of my sessions on social emotional learning, mental health, suicide prevention, you know, reading scores and things like that. So I think some of the big takeaways I had were they had one session was on digital learning, social emotional learning in the digital age, so similar to what we were talking before. And in fact, they mentioned digital citizenship. So, you know, they had reported that 13% of kids report being bullied online. So, I mean, it sounds like a small percentage, but, you know, when you think about that in our student body, it's still impactful. You know, 35% of principals report that their school has developed a plan to teach students SEL. So clearly we have a strong message, I think, going on here in what we're doing in our schools. So I feel pretty good about our where we're heading in that direction. The reading, you know, some of the things that one session I went to talked about the concept of academic learning time. You know, how much time are the kids actually getting in their classrooms? And I thought of an example too. You know, I can't say this happens at my current elementary student school, but I definitely saw it at my oldest. You know, kids line up for bus well before the school day is over. So, you know, even if it's like 20 minutes, you're losing 20 minutes of that academic time. They use the phrase bell to bell teaching, so really using that time as soon as the bell rings. And I know that's easier said than done. I see you guys shaking your heads. You know, again, it sounds really great, but you know, starting your lessons as soon as the bell rings and not ending until the bell rings again. You know, again, just those minutes matter. We know how much those minutes matter. We've been talking about that, you know, the past few weeks. So I thought that was interesting too. Let's see. I did go to one session that improved their reading scores by going to all-day kindergarten. I'm like, well, we already do that. Suicide prevention, I've got a lot on that, so I might save that for another day. I think those were probably the most impactful that I went to.
Cynthia?
Probably hear a common theme, because knowing what our strategic plan and what our issues are as a district, I focus a lot on SEL as well as reading scores and academic achievement, especially with our ELL and poverty students is one of the areas I focused on. And a lot of things we're already doing, so that was really exciting to see that, you know, we're kind of on path what we're doing. The one thing I thought was interesting is 2 of the sessions I went to, they involved a community task force similar to what we did for the bond issue for reading scores and academic achievement, to see what they thought the community could bring to the table. And I think of what Mayor Tim Haken has put as one of his goals is reading achievement in students, and maybe it's time for us to maybe look at something like that as a community, to maybe engage a task force on academic achievement. Another one I went to was the public sentiment, the real decision maker in public education, because we're a government entity and we're all, we always have to be aware of, you know, we're all very educated and bring lots of things to the table here as school board members, but making sure we're keeping in touch with what the public and how do you better engage yourself with the public to make sure you know what they're thinking and what they want as well. And then the creating culture of happiness, the happiness advantage in education. I don't know if any of I'm thinking the gentleman's name here. I'll find it here. It's the positive psychology, and basically building happiness within our buildings will lead to other successes because our employees are happy with what they're doing, and I think we do a good job of that as well, but how can we best be doing that so that we make sure we're meeting the needs of our employees as a district, and so that they're actively engaged with can be actively engaged with our students. And then Social Sentinel, we all met with them, and they're a company that kind of monitors online presence and can contract with districts to alert them of any online banter that could be a concern for a student or for our schools and so forth like that. So I went to one of those as well. That was interesting.
Mr. Tolkien.
I had to go as a representative of the state and of our school district, so I tried to blend a lot of that together. The one I was most excited about was public speaking. I know you think, golly, he's such a fabulous public speaker, but what's so funny?
Did you teach the class?
But it was really more about the liabilities and the message that you deliver, and to make sure you have one spokesperson for the board and make sure that everybody has the bullet points so that we're all, it's really not about our opinion, it's about what we do as a board. So my individual opinion doesn't count, us as a board do. So about delivering the message, and how to listen. That was a real good one for me because I'm not the best listener. But that was a really, really good session that I thought was going to be more about learning how to public speak, but it was more about how we deliver the message. I went to advising schools in suicide prevention, and that was more the legalities of what we send out to the public when there's issues and the liability concerns. I didn't fit in there. It was more for lawyers, but I nodded a lot. Went to the...
Just for lawyers, I was there too.
Yeah, no, the suicide one was the one we went to, and that was fascinating.
Yeah.
That guy just blew me away. And I didn't get to write as much because I was listening, but just a few things, you know, we forget about, we don't know what they're dealing with at home. And that's crucial, and social media and the stress of being successful in school. And the biggest thing when a child tries to be like others, and I want to be like my friend Carly, and then you lose your identity. And I thought that guy was just amazing. It was an hour and a half, and it just flew by, and I could listen to that guy for days. And then I went to a Robert's Rules session that I'm pretty sure I could have taught. It was a silly little, we played Jeopardy to learn how to do the proper Robert's Rules, and I'm pleased to say we go over and above with the proper procedure and transparency. That's all
Okay. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules and from your family to go and do that. That's been one of the things over the years that I have gained a lot of perspective from, and gotten to know the rest of the board members better when you get into a situation where you can have a little bit of social time, but also learn together. And I think it is very, very valuable. So
I can say that too is sometimes you learn more in the hallway talking to other districts and finding out what they're struggling with and how really good we have it, and then how many people really like Dr. Maher. All I'm sick of hearing that.
all right.
Repeat
Yeah.
that, please.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, that's good. You want to do committee reports quick too? I don't know what anybody's got.
I went Monday to a PTA meeting that didn't exist. It's next Monday. I missed Sports Authority while we were gone. I don't think I have a committee report.
Okay, thank you.
See, insurance, we voted our last meeting for that pay holiday on medical for 67% approximately, and that, so that will be going forward on that due to, luckily, our employees are healthy and we're doing a good job on our trust fund. Calendar has been announced. We voted on that we're ending May 24th. And in June or July, we'll know what the 2021 calendar will be based after the Activities Association meeting. Affordable housing, we have not met. In Sioux Falls Education Foundation, the Barrel House event was Monday night. I haven't got a number yet on what we've raised on that. The swap meet is in planning for this summer. And the grant programs have been distributed to the recipients. And the public school big fundraiser this fall, November, chosen a name, Public School Proud. And it's going to be held at, I don't know if I told you, at Raven is where the location is downtown for November. So working on that.
Date for that?
I believe it's November 14th.
Okay.
A Thursday, that Thursday. So,
Okay, very good.
yes, exactly. Sorry, wrong way. It's great.
Head Start met last month, and it was a fairly short meeting. We just were struggling with parent involvement, parent participation. It always dwindles a little bit towards the end of the year, but this year was just sort of a struggle to get parents involved. So we talked a lot about what we can do to help increase the parents that come to those meetings. that was pretty much it. We've got one more meeting until the end, before they recess for summer. And they always kind of try to do a fun event for the families. So in the past, they've brought in the Zoomobile, or we've met at the Butterfly House, things like that. So that definitely get more parents coming to that. So that's always a fun event to see the kids, and because the parents can bring the kids and they can all participate. In policy, we meet next week, so nothing to report there.
Southeast Tech Policy Committee met and went through a ton of policies. Most of them were just review, revise, and they'll be coming to us on May 13th. A couple of new policies that we'll be bringing to the board for first read on May 13th. And Safe, Secure Schools met yesterday. The piece of that after having been on the board so long, and that was one of the committees that my first year was a new committee, and I got the luck of the draw, honestly, to be on that. I've never looked at a public building or a private home the same since I was on that committee those years ago, and we toured, and how you trim back shrubbery and exterior lighting for safety and all of those things. But we have been so very lucky to not have had a serious incident in our school district that we needed to implement the full-blown Safe, Secure Schools regiment that is in place, and just a committee that is so much an example of our school district working with the city, working with public and private, and how that all can really be blended together. And it's just it is a terrific committee that we want to hear the least about that we can possibly hear. So good stuff. Stop the Bleed is one of the things that they're working on, that we've trained a lot of our staff on. And until we talked about that, I don't know, it was probably a year ago, wouldn't have occurred to me that people bleeding to death during any kind of an incident is the #1 problem, and that's not an active shooter situation, it's somebody falling in the hall and getting a severe cut. And I mean, bleeding to death is one of the simplest things to deal with teaching how to do tourniquets and all of those things, but you don't think about how deadly a bleed can be until you have ER docs give you the statistics. So that's it for me.
Cynthia talked about calendar. Kate touched on policy. PATH is meeting next week, so I don't have anything new to report. I think the only thing I would just want to remind anybody listening is that we do have an election coming up, and there's a candidate forum right here on May 16th from 5:30 to 6:30. So please come out and get to know the candidates, me being one of them. But I think it's important that we have a great board that works together, and Kent has worked hard for 12 years, and we will have a new board member at 1 or 2. So I want people to come out and be educated and be able to listen to what people have to say, because it is a really important decision that the community has to make. So I just wanted to put a plug in, since that's a fairly new date that was out there.
Okay. Any? No, I'll allow it. Since I only have 3 meetings left, I'll make an exception just for you, Tony.
Do you want to hand him the mic?
Yeah.
30 seconds, go.
I can do it all in 30 seconds. I don't know if you can process it. So I just wanted to kind of mention, I think all the stuff the district's doing to really support social emotional learning is amazing. One of the things I would encourage is just, we have a lot of great ideas among our staff. I think something that's kind of come up is that we want to make this a priority. And so what that means is part of it is giving the staff permission to address the social emotional learning of students. So an example was when I was teaching at Lincoln High School, I taught composition, speech, and debate. I was fortunate none of my classes had district mandated exams. So that means I could modify make sure I still taught the skills and content that was needed, but I could modify it to adapt to my students. I could even adjust to my students. I had a student last year who was in my first period class but could never be there because he had to drop off his younger siblings. And so rather than having the student drop out of the class, I met with the student and their counselor, and basically the student was just required to stop in during their lunch period every day to meet with me. And I could modify my curriculum and my delivery of lessons to accommodate that student and their immediate needs. I know this year a lot of teachers reaching out to me, that's what they're concerned with, is student behaviors. They don't feel though like they can do some of the direct instruction on the student behavior because they just have to get through so much content. And I know that's our first priority, is the academic learning. So I think it's just a matter of how do we balance those priorities? How do we give that permission? And working with some of the other staff members, they came up with some great ideas of what that looks like. And so I think that would just be the one thing I would encourage, as our staff have some great ideas. For one reason or another, they either feel like if they're doing something to accommodate students, they're like flying under the radar to do it. Or if they really do have that good relationship with their principals, they do work with their principals. And so I think it's just, that would be my biggest thing, is just making sure. The one other thing would be like counselors at the high school level. They have to do so much like with preparing for test administrations and stuff that they feel like they don't get to do the mental health stuff they really want. Thank you so much too.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else to come before the board? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you all.